Good morning and welcome to this online policy dialogue on towards a circular built environment, what role for the EU, organized by the European Policy Center and supported by Circle Economy. My name is Stefan Sipka. I'm a senior policy analyst at the EPC and I'll be moderating this discussion. When we build our homes, workspaces, roads, bridges, infrastructure, and other infrastructure, that takes a lot of resources. We extract materials from our environment that can impact nature, and we need to transport it, to refine it, to use it to build these objects. Construction also takes a lion's share of total greenhouse gas emissions nowadays. Therefore, there is a case to look at how our built environment can become more circular, meaning that, for example, we try to refurbish our old structures, to try to design new buildings so that we can recover valuable components afterwards, that we use recyclable materials, nature-based solutions. So yeah, to switch from the linear take, make, dispose model to the new circular built environment model. This ongoing unfortunate Russian war on Ukraine also the lessons from that invasion is that we need to be smarter, become smarter with the resources, using the resources we have at home, and to make our economy more resilient. And circular built environment can be part of that solution. But of course, if it was that simple, we would have already achieved this transition. So today we will discuss where we are, what are the challenges and prospects to create circular built environment, what is the role of the EU to help achieve this transition. This event contributes to the EU-funded BUSCO Circular project that is looking at circular built environment and the skills that we need in particular. So that's something that we will also hear about today. We have assembled an interesting panel. I would like to welcome Katharina Knapton-Vierlich, Head of Unit Construction, DG Internal Market, Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs from the European Commission. Samy Kazemi, Built Environment Lead, Circle Economy. Philip Crampton, President, European Construction Industry Federation, and Michael Neaves, Program Manager, Buildings Environmental Coalition on Standards, ECOS. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. And just one technical note. So we will start with your introductory remarks, followed by Q&A. But I would like to encourage our participants to write their questions in the Q&A box as soon as possible, so that we can address as many questions as possible by the end of this discussion. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Katharina Knapton-Vierlich, and happy to hear from you about, let's say, the state of play concerning circular built environment and EU policies for the way forward.
Thank you very much for inviting me today. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Wonderful. I will really limit myself to a few introductory remarks because I'm here amongst way greater specialists than I am and people who have followed that for quite a long time. But I'm really happy to present quickly to set the scene for the following discussion. And my remarks will center on 4 points. Why is the circularity of the built environment so indispensable? You mentioned it already. Second, what are the main challenges to achieve circularity of the built environment? What do we do? Third, to support achieving circularity, and where will we go? So bear with me if that is all something you know by heart. It sets the scene of today's webinar. So why is it so important that we achieve circularity of built environment? And what is known to us here in the webinar is not that widely known outside our world. that is that really, first, construction is the second largest ecosystem. It employs 25 million people at the moment, within 5 million companies. So we have to do with a great range of companies of all sizes, but most of them very small, and it's 10% of our economy. At the same time, its environmental impact is way bigger. It's 37% of all the waste and 40% of the energy consumption. Here again, the wider public, I think, is way less aware of it than the community here who meets regularly. I have a daughter who is very much engaged in climate activism. When I tell her what the impact of construction is, she always says, oh my God. So that is, to a certain extent, we are lucky that the general public isn't that aware of it yet, but it also puts a huge responsibility on all of us to deal with it and to take advantage of the opportunities it will generate. And still, construction faces structural hurdles. I mentioned already the fragmentation of the ecosystem. We don't talk to 3 or 4 big players. We are talking about 99% SMEs, of which the vast majority are micro enterprises. We are talking still about very low productivity. And we're talking about the challenge of renovating about 35 million buildings as soon as possible. So circular building has to happen also in the building stock. With new buildings, we'll never get there. And that's something we always have to keep in mind. And we have to take the public with us. My origin is German. Whenever I open a new German newspaper, which isn't that often anymore, I read about heat pumps. Notwithstanding the question whether that's really the good solution. But it each time comes, yes, but grandma can't pay for it. Yes, but there aren't enough skilled people who can do that. Yes, but I can't move to a better insulated flat or whatever. There are a lot of yes buts all over for the green transition, and that applies also very much to the construction ecosystem. And there it's of specific importance because it concerns us all every single day, how we work and how we live. So that we have our roadmap for the reduction by 2050, and it really stays our top priorities. But what do we do to try to address the challenges? The first and the overarching is the transition pathway that you all know. It describes the conditions and the necessary actions to achieve a resilient, competitive, green, and digital construction ecosystem. In fact, I believe that the digital transition is as important for the green transition as any other things that we can do. And it has to translate also into safer buildings and affordable housing for all Europeans. So we're very glad that we could develop the transition pathway with all of you and with hundreds of stakeholders in our high-level construction forum. It's there that we find our proposals developed together with you, what we can and what we should do, and we call on all of you to contribute. But that's the umbrella of our efforts. The proposal for the construction product regulation is a major building block. It only concerns construction products. And what we have to look like is at building level, not as at product level, or not only at product level. But the product is the basis of the building in the end. So we have high environmental ambitions. We will finally have a compulsory indicator to measure the global warming potential of construction products. This will also produce the data that will allow us to calculate at building level. And we are nearing the development of the positions of the Parliament and of the Council. You know that IMCO, probably some of you at least know, that the Internal Market Committee has voted on its compromise amendments. The other committees will follow. The Swedish presidency is putting a lot of wombs behind the possibility to finalize, or at least go very close to finalizing the member states' approach. But what we have to pay attention to altogether here is that in winning time, in being relatively fast, we don't lose any of the environmental ambitions of our proposal. Quite a few people think they're not high enough, but quite a few people also think they're too high. And this may influence the position of some important actors in the legislative process. And we really have to make sure that we do not fall behind the ESPR. The ESPR finally made it to a common approach. And it has, well, that's what it's for. It has high ambitions for circularity. But for construction and for construction products, it can only be a fallback option, and a fallback option that we want to use as little as possible. For us, it's the construction products regulation that will deliver the same environmental ambitions. But that means that the regulation has to keep the same environmental ambitions. And that is what we put quite a lot of work into now, to convince the legislators that that is absolutely needed. So to conclude already, these short remarks, really, construction offers enormous potential to contribute to the European Green Deal. And it's actually essential. It's not only contribution. Without construction, we never get anywhere. And with the harmonized product information that will come out of the new construction product regulation, designers have the tools at their fingertips to create the built environment of tomorrow, and that even they can follow also the principles of the new European Bauhaus. We will help all of you to invest in the right skills that will as well, but that's not my point today. Others will mention skills and the difficulty of attracting skills into construction. With that, I would like to hand back and hope I haven't overstayed my welcome.
Thank you so much. You definitely haven't. And thank you for providing this overview, painting this picture, a very complex picture of the construction value chain that takes a lot of effort also to address it, given that it is fragmented, lots of SMEs, and also for pointing out what the EU's ambitions are, and providing already some specific insights into the construction products regulation, linking it also with the ESPR, something that I also wanted to check with you at some point, and happy to come back to these and some other points at the later stage. So thank you. And now I would like to turn to Samy Kazemi and to hear from you, also building on what Katharina said, but providing additional insights about your take on this transition to a circular built environment, and in particular, as a good link to what Katharina said in the end, especially on the skills. Arguably, we need skills are crucial that we have in place to actually change the existing practices when we think about built environment and to make them more circular. So happy to hear from you about what do we need and any recommendations for the way forward.
Yes, thank you so much, Stefan, and thank you so much, Katharina. In light of what Katharina was speaking earlier, I would like to talk about why it is important to consider skills and people. Before that, I would like to talk about the situation that we are witnessing at the moment, which we'd like to, from Bosco Circular project, that I will deal with it in a bit. We like to call it the multi-transition waves. So we are receiving different waves, transition waves on climate change, on energy transition, renovation wave that we are witnessing at the moment, and also materials or circular economy in the built environment, and as well as digitalization. On the other side of the wave are the people who we are building for. We are building for housing, we are building for office spaces and commercial spaces for the people. And these spaces are also made by people. So people tend to sometimes be neglected from all this transition, that we are doing this great job, but we are making it happen and doing it with the support of us people. That said, that's why we need to really focus on creating these new skills, obviously, that is needed to be built, and also upskilling the existing skills. Just to give maybe some perspective to what the situation is at the moment in the construction sector in the European level, the construction sector accounts for 9% of EU's GDP and provides 18 million direct jobs. So this also amplifies the fact that why the working with the upskilling and skills in the construction sector is important. Also, SMEs in the European level, they employ fewer than, they are responsible for 88% of the employment, and 80% of that employment is directly related to the construction sector. Having said that, I would like to talk about a little bit about the project that Circular Economy and we are 14 partners across 8 countries. We have started and embarked on to understand what are the skills needed in the construction sector at EU level, and how we can upscale those skills and scale up in different countries and different regions. Obviously, we have the European Commission's Circular Economy Action Plan that helped us with this project and also supported us to make this change happen. We created a framework for circular interventions in the construction value chain. We also, through that, we identified what are the qualification framework for these circular skills. And we designed a train the trainer program. In that program, we had identified green roofs and multifunctional roofs, facades, interior elements as the main requirements for the skills that are needed. And during these train the trainer programs, the project intends to with the professionals in the industry, we scouted the professionals from each country, couple of potential trainers, and these trainers are in charge of creating their own program, going back to the country, and with the support of the local and regional government to scale up the implementation of these skills. That said, also we did a mentorship program that we are enrolling very soon in mentoring. Of course, we have the professionals that they need to learn new techniques, learn new ways of, for example, how to deal with the deconstruction, disassembly. We need auditors, on-site editors for the construction audits, for an example. So these are the skills that we have also dealt with, and we will train these and mentor these professionals. And also we have an emphasis on the youth and women in this project. Because obviously the youth and entrepreneurship is dependent on the youth, and women, they have been also had a very little interference in the construction sector, and now with the help and support of this project, we really emphasize on the support that is needed for women to be more present in the construction jobs, in the office jobs as well. So these are the main points that we are dealing with through this project. If I have more time, I can go on, but I can also.
I mean, we can also come back later in the discussion for any, say, particular points. But thank you so much already for providing these insights, especially on, we are basically using similar figures, I guess, when it comes to the construction sector, and I think are aware, of course, of the major impacts that it currently has, and that more needs to be done to achieve the circular environment, and where the the upskilling plays a crucial role, as you presented, Samy, and it's also linked, I would say, also with it's important for circular environment, but there is also the just transition component there. That's something that we can also reflect upon later, and I'm happy to hear more from you later in the course of the discussion. Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to Philip Crampton, and to hear from you, or let's say also from the industry's point of view, on the challenges and prospects for achieving a circular built environment.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and it's a pleasure to be here as president of FIEC. FIEC is the European Construction Industry Federation, and through our 32 member federations from 27 different countries, we represent construction companies of all sizes, from small family businesses to large international groups, from all building and civil engineering specialties. We see all the initiatives related to the green transition as positive, and therefore consider them as key priorities. Circular construction and the transition to a circular built environment is one of them. We've welcomed and supported the European Green Deal and the Commission's new Circular Economy Action Plan from the start. And as a former member of the Platform on Sustainable Finance, we were also actively involved in the development of the EU taxonomy criteria for circular economy. We're also a strong supporter of the renovation wave, which will add impetus to the effort to accelerate the transition to circularity, because longer life cycles of existing buildings will be made possible. It's no secret that there's enormous potential in the EU for making the construction sector more circular. We are one of Europe's largest consumers of energy and raw materials. In the EU, our sector is responsible for around 40% of CO2 emissions and nearly a third of all waste. From water and electricity to steel and concrete, it takes a vast amount of resources to build our homes, offices, roads, and bridges. So without doubt, we have a strong role to play as a sector in the transition towards a circular economy. But despite the opportunities, we shouldn't forget the challenges that go with them. There's legislative challenges. There's a need for an overall coherent legislative framework. There are financial challenges. Green interventions are more expensive than traditional ones, and who's going to pay? Capacity. At the moment, our companies can't find enough workers with the right skills. And without adequate investment in training and education, reskilling and upskilling, we'll never be able to reach our targets. So what are the prospects concerning the transition to a circular built environment? First, shifting from linear to circular economy will bring huge ecological improvements. Circular economy is an important approach to reduce resource use, to reduce waste, to increase efficiency, and ultimately making construction companies more profitable and sustainable. The benefits of a circular economy go beyond just the ecological aspect. For example, using environmentally friendly construction products has been shown to increase productivity and has positive impacts on well-being. One thing is clear, we will no longer be able to afford to waste so many resources. Some raw materials are already becoming scarce, such as sand, for instance, which is a crucial ingredient in concrete production, and we can't build without concrete. So overall—
May I just, sorry, interrupt you, because we have our fire test. So I will have to leave for a bit. I hope I'm back as soon as I may. I'm sorry.
Okay, Katharina.
That is fine. I will summarize some of the points and we can come back. Thanks. That's fine. Yes, please, Philip.
Okay. So overall, we believe that more needs to be done and can be done to accelerate the transition to a fully fledged circular economy. But this transition also must encompass new policies that strengthen the EU's autonomy to the supply of key materials. So what are the challenges? First of all, of course, there's the challenge of skill. The current shortage of skilled workers existed before the Circular Economy Action Plan and the renovation wave. And in order to address this at FIEC level, we've been involved in the Construction Blueprint project under an Erasmus Plus program, which aims at updating the vocational education and training systems to meet the needs of energy efficient renovation, digitalization, and the circular economy. We agree with the overall aim of the BUSCO Circular project that our sector urgently needs to overcome the challenge of the stimulation of demand for a green energy skilled workforce. We need to find new ways to attract young talent. We've also produced, together with our social partners, the trade unions, European Federation of Building and Woodworkers, and with the European Builders Confederation, a pact for skills for the construction sector, aiming at taking commitments for training and reskilling more workers. When we look at the initiatives that the von der Leyen Commission has taken so far under the Green Deal to promote circular construction, be it the EU taxonomy, the Circular Economy Action Plan, the proposed revision of the Construction Product Regulation, and 7 other challenges come to mind. One of the major challenges is there's still a problem with lack of availability of secondary materials in many countries. We believe that replacing primary raw materials by secondary raw materials, as has been proposed by the Commission in its latest proposal for an environmental delegated act under the EU taxonomy, can only be done gradually and will not be immediately possible in every member state of the EU. Currently, there's already insufficient supply of some secondary materials which some companies must ship from outside of Europe. We recognize that EU taxonomy and the Green Deal should help to increase the supply, but we fear that the increased wider demand for secondary materials will make this difficult to achieve in the timescales required. Companies in our sector need a bit more time to adapt. Often there's also the problem of incompatibility of national building codes or national building traditions with new circularity rules. For example, when it comes to minimum amounts of specific materials to be used in construction products and buildings, or when it comes to reuse or recycling. What is legally allowed in Germany might not be possible in Spain for a regulatory point of view. Setting harmonized targets that apply to all EU member states equally may prove problematic in some cases. For this reason, we've already advocated the idea of material and technology neutrality. We've called on policymakers to leave such decisions to the industry experts that are involved in the design and construction process and who know best what local conditions and traditions are. Third, there's still a problem in our sector with the lack of demand for secondary materials. The Circular Economy Plan itself acknowledges the risk of oversupply compared to the corresponding demand. The public sector has an important role to play, and we've repeatedly called for the use of secondary materials to be specified in public works contracts. We welcome any new measures and incentives that allow to ensure that EU has a well-functioning internal market for high-quality secondary raw materials and to remove existing barriers. For example, the problem of price. Secondary materials are generally no cheaper and can be even more expensive than new construction materials. This is because, as well as covering the costs of recovery, be recycled or reused, additional processes such as cleaning to remove dangerous substances and to decontaminate products must be undertaken. This generates costs. The problem of a potential higher carbon footprint of secondary materials is also an issue. From life cycle sustainability perspectives, the removal, sorting, and cleaning of secondary materials may generate more greenhouse gas emissions and produce more waste than using locally sourced raw materials. We must therefore be careful that pursuing the circular economy does not cause burden shifting and create other sustainability impacts. Last but not least, we need to ensure coherence between different EU initiatives that are now on the table and already in existing legislation. The new Construction Products Regulation, the ongoing revision of the Energy Performance of Building Directives, the EU taxonomy, the upcoming revision of the Construction and Demolition Waste Management Protocol, are all likely to foresee new rules for circular buildings. The companies in our sector need rules that are easily understandable and easy to comply with. The European construction industry is committed to the transition to a circular built environment, and we look forward to working with the European institutions to help achieve this goal. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Philip, for providing this very useful and very clear inputs on the prospects and challenges. And as I said, there are long-term environmental and economic benefits of circular built environment, but in the short run, there are challenges, and we need to, I would agree, we need to be serious about it and to face these challenges, and also to consider potential trade-offs. So as you said, in terms of costs, lack of capacity, skills, but also, as you said, there are other challenges like upstream in terms of lack of common standards to, let's say, to design new structures, new buildings, but also that we ensure access to secondary materials at competitive prices, which are currently lacking EDU and across member states. So thank you, and we can happy to discuss further on this. And last but not the least, Michael Neaves, happy to hear from you about any additional measures that, in your view, we should consider when it comes to this transition to a circular built environment, also building on what other speakers have said thus far.
Thanks, Stefan. I'm going to stick to a bit more conventional presentation briefly, but hopefully this time round it's a bit more of a change rather than not another presentation, fortunately for me. So yeah, just kicking off, my name is Michael Neaves. I'm Program Manager for Buildings at ECOS, as originally said. Just a quick word on what ECOS is. As an environmental coalition on standards, we're not very well known, but very active in this field. We're an international NGO with national members across Europe and also elsewhere in the globe. And that uniquely we work in the standardization system directly. So I work on the standards relating to the LCA of buildings, energy performance of buildings, assessment methods used in the EPPD's implementation, as well as the new standards being developed on a circular construction sector. So that's underway, so very relevant here. And I also follow various policies, but namely the EPPD, in conjunction with colleagues who work directly on the CPR, as well as waste policies, as well as financial policies. So we really cover every part of the value chain with our work, both in policies and standards. So that's our background. And just a couple of words on our vision and view of what the circular economy should really look like. And just to highlight here really is that both the linear approach that we have largely today, as well as this kind of recycling economy, both lead to a substantial amount of waste and overshoot in terms of our planetary boundaries, not just in relation to climate change, but also in relation to biodiversity and other resource consumption related environmental impacts. So we really need to kind of change the system, absolutely reduce our material consumption, and be much more kind of restorative and regenerative in the way we design different sectors, let's say. And in this sector in particular, it's about looking at the sufficiency of what we already have, which has been touched upon already, of existing assets, of existing elements that we have in the built environment. So yeah, we see that there's a number of measures that need to be introduced, which I'll get onto in a second. These figures are quite well known already, but this was just to highlight that, again, the construction sector has substantial impacts. We largely speak about materials when we're talking circularity, but also there's other, versions of circularity, let's say, relating to other resources, energy, water, etc., that also need to be explored in the sector. And in our participation in the development of the EU's kind of whole life carbon roadmap, which is underway at the moment, we see that there are, common universal issues for new buildings of any kind and existing buildings of any kind across different geographies. So we need to make use of these levers in a kind of commonly quick and effective way to address these universal impacts, because the business as usual projections that we're seeing from these from this process is that we'll have a substantial amount of emissions left over of which embodied carbon will be the main source of emissions rather than the operational emissions, which has been the focus so far of EU policy for the most part. And with the renovation wave coming up, we also cannot afford to wait to ensure that this isn't a waste wave as well. While renovation is good at using the most of existing assets, making the most of existing assets, sorry, there's a huge risk that, you know, the existing policies not being suitable will result in a lot of non-circular design and products going in, and so much waste coming out, maybe even an increase on what we have today. And yeah, just to highlight the building policies, EU and national level need to become climate and resource policies as well. But the picture is very complicated. Many of these kind of elements are involved here in the picture. So just to illustrate the complexity, what we see from Ecos's side is a few key challenges for policies and standards to work together. This is kind of bridging the gap between theory and practice to really put circularity, to implement it at scale, really, to better measure and understand resource flows and the associated environmental impacts and benefits of the circular built environment at every level, from kind of the system, asset, element, product, material, waste levels all together. And then really defining the new normal for the sector to be circular as soon as possible, really. The key reforms that we see needed throughout the life cycle, let's say, are building sustainability requirements via the EU's EPPD, but then also national building codes have a major role to play, waste prevention measures, building codes, as well as waste framework directive and the protocol already mentioned. There's a lot that still needs to be done there. In industrial policy, information and performance requirements are lacking in a way that would effectively incentivize circular economy to be adopted. There's a lot of kind of relativist performance requirements and a lack of traceability of how materials are being consumed effectively. And then, as was already touched upon, the ESPR, the Eco Design for Sustainable Product Regulation that's now being developed alongside the revision of the Construction Product Regulation, needs to have effective intermediate and final product requirements. So we need to basically have EU and national level policies that touch upon every stage of the life cycle, and then standards and incentives in the middle act as kind of facilitators. What we're seeing now, unfortunately, is that for the construction product regulation, this will remain probably as a large bottleneck or barrier to circularity really being adopted, through a lack of focus on setting environmental requirements to enter the market and bringing parity between primary and secondary resources in a way that will really promote higher level circularity in terms of what the producers are placing on the market. And unfortunately, we feel that only focusing on carbon brings about this kind of climate vision and doesn't look at the other environmental impacts that are there related to these other planetary boundaries that I mentioned. So we need to not lose sight of this. And really the EU has a role at making sure all of these areas are addressed in a coherent manner. I think as was mentioned from Philip already, it needs to be understandable and as much as possible a common framework. We have so much fragmentation across building codes, etc. today that it does make it a complicated landscape. And just to conclude really is that we do already see high circularity and better environmental performance in the field already today. It's a reality. There are high levels of circularity being implemented in major projects, but the financial and socioeconomic bottlenecks are still there, and the policy framework is largely linear. So we need to have a circular framework for a circular sector. So building, product and waste policies need to create that parity, as I mentioned, on asset level, element level, material, waste level, etc. And we need to look at the highest levels of circularity that we can leap to, rather than transition slowly from the lowest levels to the highest, because this will only act to delay progress and sustain what we have in terms of linear value chains. Unfortunately, we have kind of political barriers and legal barriers here at the moment in terms of the competencies on building policies. So we see that there's a strong role for the EU to play in coordinating more common action, at least amongst member states, in terms of what they're doing with their building codes in relation to environmental performance and circularity. The EPPD is doing some of this, but a lot on sufficiency and circularity will be delegated. So we see there's a need for action coming forward under the next commission, at least. And we need to overcome this kind of myth of the building materials not being important. There are highly functional technologies, versions of cement, for example, that use higher levels of secondary material. So setting a bit more of a common framework in terms of a performance-based approach to these materials is really important, and there needs to be more done in terms of environmental performance requirements for all products as well. And green public procurement also has a role there to play in incentivizing this. And as was touched upon earlier, the taxonomy criteria is important, but this is a label for green activities. It's not it's not something that's designed to be for all markets and all products at the same time. It's an aspirational green sustainable performance level. That's how we see it. Standards do have a key role, and we're involved in that for this reason. So key strategies, approaches, and practices that can be harmonized and rolled out, across the entire EU. And we feel like in the next commission that a Sustainable Buildings Initiative can bring that cohesion, governance, and coordination across all the areas that I've already mentioned to unleash the potential. And skills will be a big part of that. And the just transition elements should definitely be included in any kind of common overarching initiative. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for highlighting this importance of having these standards that we and that we will need to do more in that regard if we want to create contribute to, say, sustainable and also circular built environment. That indeed carbon is important in the carbon footprint, but also we need to look at other environmental impacts of buildings, and that indeed, while we need to be careful about the transition, we also need to be ambitious given the impacts of this sector on our climate and environment. And so we have one question, but before that, I just wanted to check if you have any immediate reactions as to what other panelists have said, to comment upon something, to any of the speakers.
No reaction from my side. Maybe I can just add that the fact that what we can learn also from the other transitions, for instance, the energy transition, when it happened, we were not ready with the skills forces that we needed to implement, and there was a lag at the in between the transition. So it's good to also learn the lessons from the other transitions when we are talking about the circular transition in the built environment. So yes, that's just my only reaction for now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is not the first time when where these instruments and these policies are introduced in one sector, and of course, we need to also approach it on a case-by-case basis. But there is already quite a lot of a big track record in other areas to consider when it comes to also now when we try to make our built environment more circular. And actually, that's one question I wanted to pose at some point, Samy, when it comes to energy performance in buildings. We talk somehow, the emphasis very often is on the green renovation wave, which is very much about energy savings, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and more focused on the energy and circular and the built environment. But here we are indeed trying to shed the light on these other aspects, which is on materials, on the circularity. I'm wondering, based on your experience, also the work on the Basco Circular Project, do you see, or to what extent do you see the linkages between these two when it comes to clean energy transition in the construction sector and circular transition? And especially if we talk about the skills, is it possible to have some synergies, or what are the limitations of these synergies when it comes to construction or certain parts of the construction? You mentioned facades, for example, rooftops and so forth. Like, where can we exploit the synergies which would arguably make the transition more run more smoothly?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a direct link, Stefan, between the energy transition and the circular economy transition. And what we need to talk about more is about the embodied energy of materials that are put into our buildings. And this is sometimes and most of the times is neglected as well. And we need to talk about it more. We need to identify where those materials are coming from, which countries, because even in the EU countries, we are still receiving materials from outside of EU. Where those materials are coming from, why we are still exporting materials, which obviously increases the embodied carbon of materials and inputs going into the buildings and infrastructure. We need to talk about how we can measure the embodied energy of those materials, and what are the indicators, how are we going to also later, after the buildings are built, how are we going to measure their performance, circularity performance of the buildings? What are the outputs, waste outputs during the renovation and maintenance, and also at the end of life? So of course, there is a direct, going back to your question, there's a direct linkage to the energy transition. And we can leverage on the skills side, we can leverage similar skills. For instance, we are talking about green roof, multifunctional roofs and green roofs. The green roofs, they can be the place to absorb the rainwater and use it for the recycling for the flush tanks in the building, for instance. We can have the solar panels installed where they can sustain the energy needed for very minor lighting in the rooftop or in the common spaces of the building. We can still talk about the vegetation growing fruit and vegetables to a certain need, and the green roofs, for example. So we can tackle multiple needs or requirements, which is linked to the energy and also to the climate change, as well as because also green roofs, they help to moderate the outdoor comfort and the outdoor climate. So it will help climate as well. It will help the circularity as well. We are reducing the use of materials as well. So these skills that if we bring and upskill some skills and create new skills and jobs, then they will help in implementing and achieving the goals for multiple transition needs. And I see Michael has some additions.
Yes, thanks. And yes, Michael, happy to contribute.
Sure, yeah, I mean, just to say, in the relationship between energy performance and embodied carbon, whole life cycle carbon overall, is that, yeah, the most sustainable building is typically already standing when you look at a life cycle perspective. So making, let's say, circular use of an existing building is a great start, but long term, for us to be, yeah, within our boundaries or within the budget that we'll have in future 2040 to 2050 onwards, yeah, we need to minimize the trade-offs also. So first of all, eliminating these environmental hotspots of structural elements coming from energy intensive industries. And then also not ignoring the fact that we're going to use a huge amount of material, typically primary material, at least in the short term, for the renovation works, glass, insulation material, etc. We need to, yeah, look at the skills and the economics together. I mean, we see that we need the capacity of the whole value chain to kind of shift towards a more kind of circular approach, and that includes, you know, a shift of capacity from new developments to renovation. And this will be sustainable long term because we'll have many cycles of renovation, and this will be hopefully the norm in future for us to be, yeah, sustainable by and beyond 2050. This needs to be the new norm, with a certain amount of new construction where absolutely necessary. And for the economics, I mean, whilst it was mentioned that we need to incentivize circularity in these projects, we also need to look at the economics that keep enabling very, yeah, competitive linear processes, basically. And at the moment, there's no chance in most cases for a circular approach to really succeed when this is all calculated. So a lot needs to be done there.
Thanks, Michael. And Philip?
Yeah, can I just, while we're talking about the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, our position really is that the EPPD should be primarily about improving the energy performance of buildings. And we're a little bit worried that the European Parliament has prepared a new definition of circularity to be taken into consideration in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. And we don't necessarily agree that this should set rules on circularity, as that goes beyond the initial scope of the EPPD directive in the first place. So we just have to be careful that we don't shoehorn circularity where it doesn't need to be shoehorned. That's just a brief point that we feel strongly about.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Sorry, Michael.
Yeah, no, just to say, I think that the revision of the EPPD is a recast, so it's a much more structural, large-scale revision. So the Commission really wanted to promote full decarbonisation of the buildings, and we see that at least putting these terms and the whole life cycle carbon requirements in a common manner to all national building codes is a way of having this kind of harmonised, cohesive building level policy framework. And these are the types of developments that need to occur, and we really need to use the policy tools that are available to us today, maybe rather than starting again with a brand new building policy that covers this. Otherwise, we fear that there'll be region by region, country by country uptake of some circularity elements, but it will take far too long to create what is a substantial business case for producers and for developers, etc., to construction organizations to really mainstream circularity as part of their own business models. So the EPPD revision in promoting these elements is really crucial kind of for a market creation perspective, especially when it looks as if the construction product regulation will be largely information related rather than requirements on circularity from the bottom up, let's say. So these top-down kind of demand creation elements of the EPPD are crucial, I think, and this type of approach needs to be applied in specific circularity measures in future, we believe.
But thank you, Michael. But then, Philip, back to you on this. I mean, when you also say that we need to be careful about the circularity provisions and the energy-related provisions, for example, in the energy performance buildings directive. I mean, I understand that there may be challenges in practice when it, and from the practitioner's point of view. I mean, like also Samy mentioned that the energy and circular economy agendas are interlinked in the construction sector, that you can also take them together. But then, from your perspective, are there, and what challenges do you see, or what trade-offs do you see, if there are any, that we can face and that we can try to minimize? Because I understand that there are some that when you implement this, that can be easier said than done. I'm happy to hear some additional reflections from you.
We have to
be circular and energy.
There's a couple of different aspects to this. For brand new build, all of this is actually not so difficult. So everything can be designed from scratch. The building isn't already there, or hasn't been there for sometimes up to 300 or 400 years. Like, we had our annual conference in Rome a couple of weeks ago, and we were taking around some magnificent. Obviously, we all know how magnificent there are buildings in Rome, but to bring those buildings up to modern environmental standard, it's going to take years, and people have to accept that certain elements are going to take longer than others.
So that's what you are basically talking about, mainly about the old structures that need to become circular, and this energy and circular, there can be more challenges.
That's what we're, and of course different. That's why different national associations are looking at this slightly differently, because in the newer built cities, some of the building stock isn't quite so old, But in the cities where there's ancient buildings that need to be brought up to standards, we really have to look at things a little bit differently than that. That's what I'm trying to say. Not saying it very well, but that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, it's clear. And on the other hand, like what Michael says, keeping the old and using the most out of the old buildings is actually maybe it's preferable when it comes to the green transition, rather than replacing with an entirely new structure in principle. And but then it's more challenging to do this refurbishments or to update the old structures. So there is an interesting dynamic there that we definitely need to be aware of. Michael.
Yes, just on that, yeah, and there's two. Sometimes with an old structure, you're repurposing the building. Like here in Ireland, what we're looking at the moment is some very old office stock, like Georgian buildings that were being used as offices, which aren't really suitable for offices. We have a housing crisis like the rest of Europe, and people are looking at ways of repurposing those buildings into residential. Now that's a brand new project. That's like producing a new building. But if you're not repurposing the building, if you've got a museum that is 200 or 300 years old or even older, and you want to keep it as a museum, it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
No,
Michael.
I was just going to say, yeah, we've been working on concrete reuse as a really interesting case to figure out what can be done with the existing structures made from concrete, which were not built or designed to be circular. And yeah, in the Netherlands, for example, there has been a really interesting municipal building that got transformed. They kind of cut certain elements out, retrofitted, reassembled with something that was not at all designed to be circular. And it kind of shows these kind of flagship projects, front runner projects, show where there's a will and creativity, there is a way, basically. And yeah, the more we highlight these cases and share best practices, the better. And I understand from, I believe it was the Cannes Declaration that national ministries, building ministries made in the last year or two, maybe it was 2021, they wanted to increase that cooperation. And that's why we're promoting this idea of a sustainable buildings initiative, to really bring that into a formal process across all the areas that are needed for sustainability, including circularity. We see this as really important.
Thank you.
That's interesting that you say that, Michael, because we have problems in our part of the world with convincing specifiers to use recycled concrete and recycled bituminous products, which can be every bit as good and a lot cheaper. Think about it for a minute. If you're demolishing a building or demolishing a road, and you can have the crushing equipment on site, so you're actually recycling the material on the site itself, what could be greener than that, and what could be better? But specifiers, our civil engineering contractors are finding that the specifiers are afraid of doing that, because they think the road somehow, or the building, if you're using it for backfill, will be to a lower standard, which we all know is not correct.
Yeah, just to say, yeah, that's why we're working on in SEN on the standards in relation to, for example, steel reuse. So building elements made from steel that you want to reuse, and what the processes are that you can look to inspect the condition of that. And then also we're working on the framework for circularity, which will go from kind of the structural or infrastructure level down all the way to look at the processes that might be involved in that. And this will be really useful in future, so that you can use the standards in contractual obligations to show that you comply with the right policy framework in place, of course, to give that legal certainty, and also to create the environmental performance and financial incentives to do so, because either you will have some kind of reward, or you need this to, let's say, have market access or to develop a new project in a given area. So this is how we kind of see things fitting together and giving that like stability. But the standards process is only just starting, but that's what we say, that the policy first, it kind of needs to lead the way. The EPPD, the CPR, etc., needs to lead the way in a little bit, because there's so much interface between what the standards will have to write about and the policies that will be in place. So the more cohesive and common they are at the building level, at least, and the product level already with the single market legislation, the better.
that is very interesting indeed, because yeah, from what I also gather from what you said, Philip and Michael, when it comes to recycled materials and using them in new structures, there is to some extent arguably a sort of a bias that they are maybe not as reliable as when you're using primary materials. And as I guess also as a newcomer, it's good to think about clear standards and that there is an information sharing along the value chain to actually prove that these materials are that they are of sufficient quality to guarantee a good construction, high quality of the construction product, and that can actually make it more competitive. So that's an interesting point. Samy, yes, Samy, maybe happy to hear from you.
Yeah.
Just to add to that point, so it shows that we need these new skills to be developed in each country. So we need carpenters who know how to deal with the old timber frames in the Georgian buildings, Osmanian buildings, you know, so very, very old buildings. And we need to rehabilitate, we need to uptake on those materials. We need people who have the specific skill sets on how to do the construction of these elements. Also, when it comes to the designers and architects and engineers, we need to have these specific trainings for the architects, new architects coming or existing architects, that they need to understand how they can design from a building, not from a plot of land, because this was the usual practice. We need architects and designers who know how to design from a built building, so from an existing asset, to turn it, to transform it into a housing or a new usage, or dismantle, how to design for disassembly. So just that it still emphasized that we need specific skills and professionals to take on those jobs.
Indeed, and just a question on, when it comes to that, and we've tried to link it with standards. It's of course, I'm aware that it's easier said than done, and we talk about provision of services, and single market for services is still to be fully developed compared to a product single market, which is also to be finalized. But what is your take, Samy, if you have any points on this, like be it at the EU or maybe regional, national, member state level, the role of standards for work skills, circular work skills. What is the role for that? What are the prospects? How that can actually also help to ensure that actually when we use circular materials, for example, or knowledge how to disassemble a certain structure, that there is there is a trust, that there is confidence that actually these recycled products outcomes will be of sufficient quality. Samy, I was thinking if maybe you have any inputs on this, on the work skills and standards, if you have anything to add on this.
So obviously the local and regional governments, they have a big role there to scale these solutions, also when it comes to urban mining or reuse markets as well. So this is also another discussion, that we need the support and the input from the local governments into supporting that, in creating a market that is safe, it's trusted, and also think about and consider the creation of the demand side, for example, through procurement policies, how they can create a market and support the demand side as well. So obviously, the role of the local governments, regional governments is prominent here in this situation. So yes.
Sorry, Michael, before I give you the floor, Katharina is back, so I think she's listening to us, but apparently there is a problem with the camera. I've sent a request to Katharina a request to turn the camera on, and I hope it works now. And yes, great, it works now. And happy to have you back. I don't know when exactly you came back and what you missed or what you managed to hear, but I can also summarize some of the points, and then also happy to hear from you. But Michael, if you had something also related on this on this topic we can finalize with that, and then I can come back to Katharina. So
yeah, very quickly, I think like the standards are going to do an important job at codifying like the consensus of how these processes and procedures that will foster circularity are going to work at the building level at least, and kind of the project level as well, and that will do a good job. But of course, and this will be useful for developing kind of skills related schemes, I'm sure, by taking that knowledge that's been developed and elements of the legal framework and kind of transmitting it to the sector in a useful way. But also, you know, there needs to be some kind of bottom-up action, because these standards take some time, and we've seen a lot of progress in different countries and regions independent of, you know, the European standardization process, which can take some years, unfortunately. But, you know, both of the two working together will be important, and I think they'll be essential to kind of understanding the built environment around them, the existing structures, and then the existing materials, but also standards. For example, for cement and concrete, there's currently some blockages in terms of allowing actually high secondary material content cements onto the market in different member states. So we also need to harmonize the acceptance of materials or products such as that across the whole market, because the way that it's structured at the moment still leaves some fragmentation, and if it's not referred to in the right national concrete standard, then it won't be accepted in that country. So this is just an example of where, yeah, the standards actually validate the acceptance and help people agree or understand, even if they are not fully experts in the material or the products. You know, architects won't go into the details fully into the standards. They'll look at how it's referred to and what they can use in a jurisdiction and go from there. And this kind of efficiency is what's beneficial about these standards, but they need to be effective in allowing the circular materials through. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. And yes, Katharina, happy to have you back. So meanwhile, we covered a number of points, and maybe I can just summarize it that we talked a lot about standards for circular buildings, the importance of skills also in that regard, creating a demand for secondary materials so they can be as competitive to the virgin primary materials. Also the linkages between the energy performance in buildings and greater circularity, among others. So a lot of these points also go back to I would say to the Commission and as to what the EU can do. You said already in the beginning that about the ongoing work, for example, in the construction products regulation, linkages also on with the eco-design, the proposed eco-design regulation. I guess what I could ask you at this point is indeed, is there a case or space for more to be done at the EU level when it comes to standards for circular buildings? You mentioned common indicators, for example, in the construction products regulation, but can we do more? For example, can we talk about eco-design standards for buildings, similar way how we have it already for energy efficiency in electronics, or now we'll have circular requirements in the eco-design regulation, the linkages with the ESPR. If you can elaborate more also on what you said before on these policy instruments and and the role of standards in particular.
I mean, well, I missed the discussion. So if I'm saying something that has been said, bear with me. I started listening in when indeed the importance of standards and the time it takes to create them. Perfectly correct. What is also important is the relationship between the standard and the national building codes. The fact that the standard is a performance standard, so it doesn't have minimum levels that you have to achieve, and this will be the national building codes that we provide the information that allows national regulators to say this is what we want and this is what we don't want. We also provide the calculation method that will allow it to calculate at building level through the construction products that are used. But yeah, well, and especially for all the buildings, that's obviously not workable. That is only workable if the whole of the new construction, but still, so there are. We believe that through the standards and the calculation methods that will be in there, we achieve exactly a level of comparability across the European Union, a level of a level playing field for entry into the market, which we do not have on these. We will have the calculation methods, so we won't have everybody being able to say, oh, I'm circular like this, I'm circular like this, because we will be able to verify that much better than before. And for us, that's a necessary prerequisite, and that's also why we will include that in all the standards that we are working on. Then I think I heard something about reuse, and there also the proposal that we have made will likely change insofar as the aim will be, but this is, we'll see, to include standards for the reused products in the standard for the new product. So that from the beginning, not separately, that is one. We also think that's actually a good proposal. To have reuse wherever it makes sense to have reuse right from the start, being taken into account in the standardization work. Then I think these are the main.
But then, just to say, so if understood correctly, in the, I mean, yeah, the EU level, there will be standards, methodologies provided, but then they need to be applied to the national building codes. So there will be still a prominent role for actually member states to still to standardize, to provide standards for the.
Yes, to actually set the ambition that they have in their national building codes. But there we are lacking competences, and they are ferociously guarded by member states. This is not part of our competence to regulate what can be built.
Yeah, because there we see, I guess, a difference between this sector, this value chain, and other value chains, such as, for example, electronics, batteries, and let's say this kind of commodities, that where the EU is now directly intervening, basically defining the rules on how to produce them, how to design them. And information specifics on information sharing. So here we see a bit of a difference, which comes back to some more fundamental reasons for that, and the question of competences. But good to shed some light.
We have also, we have also made proposals that, well, on green public procurement, because in many fields of construction, it's the public that is the main, well, the main principle.
Yeah.
And in some areas there's only public procurement. We run into some difficulties there with the legislators on how we should integrate green public procurement in there. We also, I was happy to hear about the importance of standardization work. You probably all know that that's not always perceived as a successful way to get to up our climate ambitions. There are some often voices who say, well, it's better if we do that by a delegated act. It's better if we do that from commission driven and not standardization organization driven. We believe that's not such a dichotomy, because when we work on developing a standard, we work with national regulators, we work with civil society organizations, we work with industry, and that's what sometimes does not inspire confidence in some actors to actually have a whole that is workable. And we so we also believe that the CPR is the way for the climate ambitions in construction more than the ESPR. But they are whole. One is the fallback of the other.
Yeah. And just because you also touched upon the green public procurement and these additional, let's say, standards or criteria that can be applied, I'm just wondering to what extent are you also involved? You can say something when it comes to the green taxonomy rule developments now, because in a way they are also will effectively set standards. I mean, the investors don't have to use them, but it's expected to have a big impact on when we define what are the green economic activities, including also in the construction. And we know there is a climate taxonomy, but now there is this environmental taxonomy. Is there maybe some interesting insights you can provide on when it comes to the taxonomy level?
Well, we are involved in taxonomy work. We have done the detailed work on how to integrate that into the taxonomy. I'm not the expert on it, and before I venture into talking about it, I'd rather refer all those to my colleague, who most of you know, who is the expert on it, Philippe Mosley, who can give you all the details. I don't feel confident to do it myself.
No, sure. It's a universe on its own, and it's extremely challenging to fully grasp it. So, but yeah, just had to check.
But we have had quite an influence on it done, where we think that's also important to keep as much product neutrality, for example, as much So not to say this product is green and this isn't, but to measure that differently. No. I think that's something that's very important for us, and to have the right mix.
Yeah. Great, thanks, Katharina. And Michael, I see you raise your hand.
Sure. Yeah, just a few small points to say. I mean, with circularity indicators, the levels framework also has a kind of calculation tool that looks at calculating at the kind of project level. It also gives more weight to the higher levels of circularity that are more environmentally beneficial. So this is a really interesting tool. And green public procurement criteria at the building level, which is voluntary, is being developed, which will take that forward. But it'd be great to understand what Katharina maybe feels that the Commission can do in future to really promote that amongst member states who are indeed very protective over their building competencies in terms of actually setting the regulation. And in terms of the use of standards, I mean, we see that standards are very useful for kind of the processes and procedures, and not necessarily for setting these minimum requirements, because it's a pseudo kind of self-regulation process, which might be a bit provocative. And for secondary products, we need to be really careful that unreasonable burden is placed on the market for secondary building elements and products, whilst also, of course, respecting safety, etc. So this needs to be really well governed to not actually create a kind of standards barrier for secondary products to be reused, that are going to be reused, to be placed on the market. But from my understanding, there is also another kind of more localized route that may be part of the CPR, but my colleague follows that the closest. So yeah, just the 2 points on EU level promotion of the uptake of these tools for circularity, and more ambitious circular building codes at national level, and just the comment on reuse was all I had to add.
Thanks, Michael. Philip, I see you.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on green procurement, because procurement wasn't part of what I talked about in my introduction, and we welcome any means in procurement to move away from low cost bidding. So I think the whole procurement of construction needs to be looked at, not just from an environmental point of view, but from a complete sustainable, and I mean sustainable, of the industry. The industry is working at the moment on much too tight margins. And I think the procurement methods, just going for the lowest bid all the time, really doesn't help the industry to grow and build its resources. So we welcome anything that in a tender situation or in a competition that can evaluate the tender that doesn't just mean price. Like, I've won lots of projects over the years for being very low price. Nobody's ever looked at the methods I'm using and whether they're green or sustainable or anything else. So we certainly welcome, as an industry, different ways of deciding who the winner of a bid is. and green procurement is really much part of that. Yeah. So that's while it was mentioned, I thought I'd jump in on it.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks a lot for highlighting the importance of the green public procurement also in the construction sector. And Samy, I'm interested if you have anything to add on this when it comes to green public procurement for circular work skills in the construction. If also as part of the project or your previous work, you how did you come across it, or is there any interesting insights now that Katharina is also here? You know, how is it applied? To what extent is it applied? Any insights on this, on the power of the green public procurement to create the demand for circular work skills, associated trainings, and so forth?
Yes. It is very important, but we are still not there, I would say. I would have to say. So we are working on Bosco Circular and various projects that I am in touch with the municipalities and here in Europe. We are still not there. We're still talking about it. We're still having strategic meetings about having built these, linking the skills needed to the procurements. And we're still at the beginning of the way. So not much has been done in this area. Yeah, that's my part to say. But of course, there should be a direct link between the procurements and the regulations that are going to come up, and the green procurements, as Philip was saying, and also who is going to, because also what we tend to see is that the municipalities and the government policymakers or the people who are actively working, they need to be upskilled as well. So we need specific trainings for the government sector as well to upskill and create this awareness around circular built environment. So we are still at the very early stages, I would say, and this is the work that we are doing closely through different projects. Yes. Thanks
for mentioning this, and indeed it's good to identify the potential, but also the gaps when it comes to implementing these rules possibilities, because indeed we do need to create a demand from the public sector and also from the market to enable this access to the work skills that we need. Philip, yes.
Yeah, just a brief comment. All of us could do well to look at many of the Nordic countries who have actually introduced green procurement already and are miles ahead of the rest of us. And some of them could actually be written into any country's rules. It's they're so far ahead of us. So I think look at the Nordic models; they're using green procurement already.
Thank you, Philip, for mentioning this. Indeed, good to look at particular regions, member states, and then know about and share good practices to then scale them up further. Katharina, I also wanted just to check with you, especially on the question on the skills. We discussed and Samy talked about it as part of the Bosco Circular project. Philip also mentioned that the construction industry is also on the case, and that we need these skills for the necessary skills for the circular built transition environment and the green transition in the construction sector. What, in your view, what can be done more, building on current the lessons learned? What can that be done more at the EU level to support the development and uptake of skills for circular built environment in particular?
I mean, you all know better than I the various projects that we are, well, at least that's what me says, the various projects that we do have and on which we continue to work, while also their education stays the competence of the member states. So what we can provide is training curricula, is exchange, is and we have done that, is the skills projects that we have. We are working together with those who are in our Director General. We will in fact very soon launch another survey on the skills need that member states actually think they really are, so that we can really focus our actions again in the future. And I'm not sure it's only skills. I think it's just the people who could have the skills. So, and we really try to make our things available also to, we have these SME trainings, we have this digitalization matrix where you can check how much you are actually ready for digitalization. But what is much more difficult for us is really to reach down to the 95 of the 99% that are micro enterprises, and that are not there yet. What we have to do is make construction sexy. And I mean, Samy also mentioned females. Now it's half a year ago, just at the beginning when I came, I went to Munich to the machine fair, and I had rarely felt that lonely as a female in the last 10 years, and have rarely seen more people sort of from the I'm strong brigade. I mean, I don't want to say anything against strong males, but construction, everything I saw there, it doesn't need a lot of strength anymore, which will also need another transition for people who actually chose the profession because it needs the strength. But at the same time, there are so many, with the digitalization, with completely different machinery from the machinery that existed 30, 40 years ago. Well, anybody can drive a really big thing if they are trained on it. You don't need to be 2 meters and very strong. And I think that's where we really have to invest a lot to attract a wider part of the population into being interested in construction. And that probably has to come, but there will be limited, with also taking with us the people who now work in construction. I think construction is not an easy workplace for a 19-year-old girl leaving school if she is interested in creating the built environment. So, and that doesn't, so there are attract more people with different skills, make it interesting for those who are highly educated and who are not looking for a strongman job. I think then there are loads of opportunities, but it will take time.
Thank you. Thank you, Katharina, for also this interesting aspect on the social aspect and the gender aspect, that to have a full picture and that more can be done also in the construction sector in this sense.
I wasn't the first to mention it.
Yeah, it's good not to miss it, definitely. Samy.
Yes, very quickly, I'm unconscious of time. Just very quickly, I know that just to confirm what Katharina was saying, there's obviously great amount of support coming down, mainly supporting on financial level and mentoring of the SMEs from the European level. What we are being challenged at the moment is to find the interested people who want to take those courses, who want to participate in those mentoring and yes, those facilities. So how we can make circular built environment and also built environment of construction skills and jobs more interesting for the youth. This is our challenge at the moment. We are working towards that.
I'll just react very quickly, is that I think it's, the whole shift is about now nurturing and taking care of the resources and built environment that we have. And that's the kind of more useful framing than the approach we've taken for some time. So that's, I guess my takeaway as well is that at all levels of policy in all areas, it needs to be about this kind of nurturing and taking care of resources properly as much as we can. And hopefully we'll be more successful.
Thank you. Philip, maybe also a key message for the end, and also if you have any particular point, just like in brief, on also the waste shipments of construction waste. I know that it also comes about the standards, the different standards that enable us or disable us to move waste across Europe. But if there is any key point you want to raise in that particular, because you talked about secondary materials, but happy to hear and say a closing statement.
Well, I'd just like to concentrate more on what we've been talking about before, which is basically skills. And as Katharina said, it's not necessarily skills, it's people. And we as an industry have to really attract and sell the industry better. And I can just use the example of what we're doing in Ireland at the moment from our own federation in Ireland and with the local government. We've set up a construction skills academy, which is being funded half by the government and half by industry. And part of the ideal of this is to actually start in the schools, and start in schools, both primary schools and secondary schools, and get people to come to schools and explain to both boys and girls that this is an industry for everyone. This will take a while to work, but that's where you have to start, to encourage students, people, not just to come to become doctors and lawyers, that really construction is a very interesting and varied career. And we've started it. We're having a small amount of success, especially we want to attract more women, and I fully agree. I couldn't agree more with what Katharina, and I've heard you say it before in front of me in FIEC's offices in Brussels. And we are conscious of that basically half the population is almost being ignored when it comes to physical construction. It's better for the professionals, for the engineers and architects and whatever. It's nearly 50-50. If you look at the engineering schools and architecture schools in the universities, it's probably 50-50, but we're not as good on the trades. We certainly aren't. And you're quite right. Most trades can now be equally done by men and women on sites. We're seeing electricians coming through. We're seeing plumbers coming through, painter decorators, even crane operators. We're seeing, certainly in my part, we're seeing several. So it is happening. It's too slow, but that's where the future is. It's not just skills, it's people.
Thank you so much, Philip. And yeah, on that note, I think we can wrap up and just say that indeed what we discussed, there are enormous challenges, but also there are prospects, long-term economic, social, environmental benefits of creating a more circular and sustainable built environment, the importance of standards, the importance of work skills, the importance of policies, and also a role for member states for sure to make this transition happen. So yeah, let's see. Hopefully, we will manage to make further progress together with the public sector, industry, civil society, and experts. So I would like to thank our speakers for very valuable insights, and also to thank our participants for their attendance. And indeed, looking forward to staying in touch and having you at our future events. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Thank you.